What's up, Larry? Thanks for having me on, man.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. This is near and dear to my heart. We're not only speaking to husbands and fathers, but husbands and fathers who are just trying to make a difference, man. Entrepreneur, business dads, all that good stuff. Your background is really fascinating. And this interview is actually so timely because when I was doing homework on you, dude, the very first podcast that popped up was you interviewing your dad. And I was like, holy crap, man, we're just getting right to it. That's the first interview that popped up on my feed. But I would love for
Yeah.
you to just share your upbringing with the audience.
Listen, man, it's we all have our stories and I think they refine us. Mine really started just being this kid from New Jersey, just this little kid and my parents ended up moving us to Texas and I think that's kind of where the story really started. My parents got taken advantage of by a real estate agent and they ended up losing the house and they both got fired from their jobs. We ended up being homeless, which brought us
What?
out to Colorado. Yeah, man, it was a trip. And that really kind of set the trajectory for my life because my parents couldn't afford college. So I took the SAT and the ACT 9 times just to get an appointment to the Air Force Academy prep school. Served my country for 5 years at the Air Force Academy, and then another 6.5 after, which kind of culminated in this experience in Afghanistan in combat for 7.5 months. Um, Dude came back from that struggling, like most veterans do, with some form of PTSD and an identity crisis getting out of the military. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'd probably say, has turned to drugs and alcohol for quite a bit. Got wrapped up in that. Finally figured out that I needed some help. I'm just giving you the whole story.
Yeah.
We probably wrap it up after this. Kind of got to that spot where I was like, damn, I need some help, and went and seek some professional help. Got a therapist, got a coach, and that kind of led me to to a new start of my life. And became an entrepreneur. I got my MBA because I didn't know what I was doing, and all of that led to this moment in time where now I am a transformation coach, helping men and women have it all in their business, in their relationships, and in their life.
Wow, it sounds like the easy road.
Yeah, just a couple
Wow.
pit stops.
Well, first of all, first and foremost, thank you very much for your service to this country, man. I don't take that lightly. We've had so many amazing military men and women who have been on the podcast, and we don't take that lightly. I do want to back up for a moment. How old were you when you became homeless as a kid?
Yeah, so it was what, seventh grade, seventh grade
Oh,
going into eighth grade, and
not the middle school is tough enough. Like
yeah,
that happens. So keep going.
yeah, middle school with the name Sergio down in Texas. An Italian name down there didn't really sit well. But it was the first time I watched my dad crying and my mom have to console my dad. And as a kid, right, you look up to your dad as a hero,
Yeah.
and he broke, man, he broke. And watching that and experiencing that, and then still being protected by it from my parents in a way that allowed us to still feel like children, not fully experience it, but understand that there was some issues and some things in play. It was tough to watch. It was really tough to watch, and that kind of set them back for a few years as well.
My gosh, man. Okay, so I want to talk about this moment you saw your dad break down, and I'm gonna lob a question out at you, and then I'm gonna share a really quick story personally myself, so you have a minute to think about this. But seeing your father cry, there's something, and seeing your father break, there's something that happens to us, I think, psychologically as children when we see our parents break down, right? And there's like this psychological safety aspect, right? One of a kid's three basic needs is to feel safe. When you see your parents break down because we're like, oh my gosh, we're in trouble, that really trickles down quite a psychological and an emotional impact, I think, as us as kids. And be quite honest, when you're first walking through it, I don't think you fully really understand it. So I really want to know what bringing you back to that moment where you saw him break down and you heard the news of what was going to happen. I would love for you to just think about and share what it is that was going through your mind and why you think about that. I was 15 and I was 16 at the time. My mom had been living with this guy moved in with us, long-term boyfriend, I think 3 years ish. And this guy was a nightmare, like the worst of the worst nightmare guys my mom has ever dated, been with, married to, whatever. And I'll never forget them breaking up. I came home from school and I found my mom on the floor of our living room with no furniture in the house. My mom had no job because she worked for him. So she had no job. We had no furniture. And I just remember my mom crying on the floor. Everything's gone. Everything's gone. I don't know how I'm going to make the house payment. And in that moment, I was like, holy crap. I didn't even really realize what was going on in front of me. But here's what I'll tell you. That moment impacted me, and literally the emotional connection I have with money itself, it impacted me for like, holy crap, I'd never want to be in that situation where everything's out of my house and my kids are like, what are we going to do? So I know for me that impacted me big time, but for you, let's go back to that moment. What is going through your mind?
I felt helpless. Like
Yeah.
there was nothing that I could do, but there's something that I wanted to do. And as you brought up that story, I've been trying to search for this for a long time, and you just uncovered something in me. I didn't realize where my scarcity mindset actually came from. Right? Watching my parents lose it all and then not having the money and then having this constant narrative of, well, we can't afford it, but never feeling like we couldn't afford it, but knowing that we couldn't afford it. And I think, as that's kind of carried me to now, like I didn't realize that I had been carrying that storyline with me for so long. Um, but to answer your question, I think in that moment, I just was like, oh shit, like what's going on? Right. And there's
Yeah.
this immediate fear. There's this immediate uncertainty. You don't know what to do. Like you're looking to your mom now to be like, okay, like, are you the leader now? Or like, is dad, like, what do we do here? And then
Yeah.
immediately I was transported back to New Jersey to hang out for the summer with my grandparents. And so I didn't feel like this, like I knew something happened, didn't fully wrap my brain around it. And then I came back and we were in Colorado and the whole home was set up.
So like it was almost like you stepped away from it and went with grandma and grandpa. And then you came back to a home. Is that correct?
100%.
Okay. So, but in the meantime, I'm really, really curious. How long were you with your grandparents?
We were there the entire summer. So probably
So the
what?
whole, okay.
June, July, came back end of July, early August, because school starts here in August. And we would talk to my
So,
parents on the phone, but I never thought about it.
wow. So were you really, I mean, were you worried? Was there like a carryover of emotional impact and worry of like, oh my gosh, like what if we never have a home again? Or what if what if we go to Colorado and what if it happens again? What was going through your mind?
Yeah. I think that was the summer that I started to get into a lot of trouble with my grandparents, of just like speaking up and just saying things and, being like on the cusp of going into eighth grade. So you're getting a little bit of an attitude, obviously. But I think as I got there, what happened to me is like I was this very jovial kid. I was like very external, an extrovert. And then I show up after all of this had happened, and we're in this new home, and now all of a sudden I'm playing small because I'm afraid. I'm protecting
Yeah.
myself because I don't want to get beat up. And so like what happened was my self worth kind of went down for a bit, and I'd allow people like people that I would meet and friends that I have to treat me poorly because I was just afraid I was going to lose it. And so that really kind of set like this precedence for some of the relationships and friendships that I built as a young adult, tolerating things that I shouldn't tolerate until at one point I was like, yeah, I don't need this because I watched as my
Yeah.
dad and my mom built themselves back up.
Wow. You mentioned something in there too, where, this story probably carried over. Like you might have had a relationship with money that was very scarce. I just got done, I don't think we're ever done learning, and growing in our evolution. And over the past 10 years, I've invested a ton of time and resources into evolving, constantly learning, constantly growing, constantly being challenged. I joke, I always have somebody on the payroll who's coaching me and helping me be better. I just got done with a 3-month deep dive with a coach, and part of what we went through as the program was my emotions that were locked in with finances, and was it abundance or scarce? And quite frankly, it's always has been scarce. And I really didn't understand why. And we unpacked a lot of things from the past. He's like, that was a launching moment for you, because probably every bit of drive and every bit of motivation, the risks that you've taken, the risks that you haven't taken, have probably all gone back to that moment of like, I never want to be in that position where I'm telling my kids, holy crap, we just lost the house or we just lost everything. And I was
dude.
like, yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. But reprogramming and rewiring, because here you are, a successful entrepreneur. And in order to do that, you have to really bet on yourself and you have to take a lot of risks. And that, I think, coming from our upbringing, there's a part of us that's insanely motivated, right? I mean, there's probably so much relentless drive in guys like me and you. It's like, yeah, you ain't stopping me. Like, I will go through a brick wall, right, to make this thing work. But at the same time, there's also that voice in us, I think, that could be very loud at times, be like, oh man, like it's gonna get scary. But for you, how did that show up?
Hey, dude, it's still showing up. Right?
Right?
I've been building out of lack for the last decade. It's how I built my real estate business. It's how I left the military. It was like I was on a one-way fucking mission to prove to everybody that I could do something and that you weren't
Yeah.
going to stop me. And every time you stacked the cards against me, right, I would just run through the wall and knock him down. And earlier this year, I mean, the real estate market kind of went in the shitter for a bit. And so I'm in this position where I'm transitioning into starting my coaching company, and yet I'm still in the real estate game. The coaching company is not making money, and the real estate business for me has really started to quiet down. And I have to look at my wife, and I have to show her the bank account for the first time since we've been together. I was like, "Hey, babe, it's like we gotta slow down on our spending," and that ate me alive, man. I was like, damn it, I'm about to repeat all the shit that I watched as a kid. And now I had a traumatic response, which really allowed me to look at the numbers in my bank account and extrapolate the worst case scenario and create this thing for my wife. But in my mind, I'm one step away from like fucking the whole thing up and being homeless. Now, that wasn't the reality, but it felt so real to me. And so it's this constant vigilance against these stories that took root as a child and rewriting them so that they don't define me for the rest of my life, so that I can learn how to create from a position of abundance, because it's way more powerful than being like, I have something to prove when you don't have anything to prove.
Do you find that working with entrepreneurs that there's more people out there that drive from fear of loss and feel fear of failure versus like, hey, what can I go do? Like, what are the amazing things that can open up for me? What's the abundance that's like literally waiting for me?
Yeah, I think, listen, at least from in who I've been working with and coaching, a lot of people are creating out of lack.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful thing. Like, there's no negative connotations to it. Like, lack will put you into action and it'll allow you to build and create, and it's super powerful. Just like anger. Anger is a powerful emotion. It can pull you out of sadness and depression. Lack can help you build, but what happens is when you get to this place of abundance, since you've built out of lack, you never actually took the time to enjoy the journey along the way because you're so focused on the end goal that when you get there, you're like, huh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. So what do? You burn the whole thing to the fucking ground. And what do? You build out of lack because that's all you know. And so it's
Yeah.
this cycle that once you get to this peak of like, okay, I've done something, you don't have to burn it down. You simply have to be like, okay, well, how do I create differently, play this game differently from where I'm at now? And so I think there's a massive transformation at that point when you do have some abundance, to going from building out of lack to building out of abundance, and being vigilant with being like, okay, I have to think, operate, and collect different resources and do this a little bit differently from here on out.
100%, man. Let Do you mind if we step back? Because I really want to talk about your
Yeah,
experience in the military, if that's okay.
of course.
Because I'm sure there's probably a great deal of you that, as far as how you're wired, how you go about your day to day, how you go about your business, your family, was probably some of that was probably created out of challenge and some of the things you experienced over there. But I would love for you to share what was your experience in the military. And you said that there was, especially about what, 7 months, correct, that were a massive challenge for you over there.
Yeah, I mean, the Air Force Academy as a whole is a pressure cooker. It's 5 years of, I think the attrition rate's like 50%. And so they're constantly just, it's a leadership development tool. That's it. That's it. How can we break you? Can we break you? Can we break you? And if you make it, now you're ready. And that was difficult. There's no doubt that that was difficult. Taught me a lot about what I'm capable of doing, about to the depths of my, knowing myself the best you can know yourself at the age of 22. But what really refined me was my experience in Afghanistan. And Luckily, I never had to raise my weapon and fire around. Like, I'm grateful for that. But the experiences I did have of getting attacked on our first day, right, getting attacked on Christmas Day, watching people get killed in front of me, having the guilt of being able to not make the decision to raise my weapon and help somebody out because I was scared, and having to walk away and live with that for the rest of my life, having to watch coffins being carried into a C-130 for an angel flight because two men had been killed in action that day, and they were being flown back home to the U.S. to say goodbye to their family. Like, all that stuff will change you. And coming to face with death multiple days in a row until you finally get to the point where you're so numb that you're like, I'm not even going to run for cover. If it's my time, it's my time. That'll shake the shit out of you. That'll shape you quite a bit. And you come back from that after being there for 7.5 months. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, and tell me about that transition. I've heard one of the hardest things. I mean, pack, PTSD on top of this, right? But even the transition from going from active duty military into civilian life is a tremendous transition for our military warriors. But share with me what was going through. You had PTSD. You're over there for 7 months. You're seeing all these things happen, growing numb to it. Now you've got to transition from warrior into civilian. What was that like?
I couldn't even connect with my parents, man. Like, people came over to see me the day I got back from my trip, and I was just like, I know we know each other, and like, we will learn to know each other again. And I'm happy to see you, but like, it just was off. Things were off. I was off. And even the transition out of the military, I was like, I was basically throwing up both middle fingers, being like, I'm done. Get me out of here. Right. Like, that's how excited I was to get out. And then on the day of my separation, when they did a ceremony for me, I started to cry. Like, I broke down. I think the reason I broke down was because for the last, since I was 16, the whole goal had been to get into the Air Force. And then the whole goal was to become a fighter pilot and to serve my country. And then I get in and I'm like, that's not what I want to do. And finally, it's this culmination of all this hard work that's come to an end. And now my entire identity is going to shift. I'm no longer Captain Sergio Nazzaro. I'm veteran Sergio Nazzaro. And so the rules and the games that I played by, right, for the last 11 years, the same uniform every single day. Now I have a choice, right? The same type of workload every single day. Now I have a choice. And the dream that was sold to us at the Air Force Academy was, if you graduate and you serve your country, you will be the cream of the crop. You're going to have no problem finding a job. And for some people, that may be true. But I knew I didn't want to go work for the government. And so what about those people? And so it left me in this position of just self-doubt, insecurity, uncertainty, identity crisis. And then you kind of package that all up in this box of post-traumatic stress disorder. And you're left with a recipe of like, what do I do here?
Can I just pause for a moment here and just tell you, man, I just appreciate you. And I mean that from the heart, man. Like, I don't know war, I don't know battle, right? You do. And you speak for so many of our men and women who have been through that. And I think when someone like myself says, "Hey, thank you for your service," for me it goes deeper than that. But I would say, even on this podcast, I think I've had 35 Navy SEALs on this podcast, but this story that you're sharing with me and the impact of how that carried over is probably one of the most impactful stories I've ever heard. And it truly, truly, from the depths of my heart, just makes me want to tell you, I appreciate you, I honor you, I acknowledge you, thank you. And I mean that from a very even emotional standpoint. Like, it's insanely hard. To digress for a moment, have you ever seen the movie 13 Hours?
I don't know.
So it's all about the attack on was it the American Consulate in I think it was 2013.
Oh yeah.
I don't. It was 13 Hours, where basically it was two SEALs, an Army Ranger, and 2 other special forces guys. I think there were 6 total that basically fended off like 200, attackers, and they couldn't get air support, and they were also protecting 24 CIA agents. It was hellacious. It was 13 hours of, these guys fending off this incredible wave of war that just kept coming at them. And there were 3 big waves of war that came their way, gunfire. And then in between 2 and 3, those waves, both the SEALs sat down, and the guy who plays, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he plays Jim on The Office.
Oh yeah.
John Krasinski, I think his name is. I might be saying that wrong, but anyway, he plays one of the SEALs, and he does a really great job of it. And my oldest son and I, who we love watching these movies, like we just watched Lone Survival, we watched American Sniper, and he wanted to watch this one. And there was this really powerful conversation between John Krasinski, who plays, I think, Jack Silva, who's a Navy SEAL, and Tyrone Wood, who unfortunately was killed in the next firefight. But John Krasinski was like, downtime's always the worst. The adrenaline leaves and suddenly you're just here with your thoughts. And he's like, I keep thinking about my girls, my daughters, my wife's pregnant again. I'm retired. I'm doing contracting work. Like, why do I keep finding myself back here? Why do I keep saying yes to these? Every time I go home, I keep saying, this is it. I'm here to stay. I'm never going back. And I always come back. He's like, why is that? And Tyrone Wood says, warriors aren't trained to retire, Jack. It's part of who we are. And then the tail end of that conversation, they go deeper, and they're like, once you have a family, and before family, like our why and to protect our country was like our biggest passion in our life. It's what we would live for and die for. Well, once we have family, like wife, kids, or even when we're reunited relatives, after we've seen battle, that starts to change maybe a little bit for some of us, being that, well, this is now my why. It's not necessarily my country and being in the military. It's now the people that mean most to me. And that is a hard transition to make. And for you, it sounds like you're putting us in that moment where you're back home and you're like, we're gonna have to get to know each other again, kind of, or really understand how we're going to operate. And what was going through your mind as far as like, was it just that you may not have known yourself, or you saw this maybe darker side of humanity, or you had evolved into maybe quite frankly, maybe a different person altogether?
Like, answer D, all the above. I think it's all of it, man. Right? Like, there's no doubt that transforms you into a different person based on what you see, what you experienced. And not only that, but all of the work that has to go up to that point, the training that you put in, knowing that you may or may not come back, the last goodbyes that you have to say. Like, people are like, I want to throw you a going away party. I'm like, all right. But like, you understand, like, to me, that means I have to look at all of you and be like, hey, this may be it. Like, that's the position that you're putting me in. And so like that started before I even left. And I'm grateful that they did it. But in my head, I'm like, I don't want to do this. Just like let this go. And so when I get back, and now all of a sudden it's like this reintroduction to the world, because everybody's life, right? I leave, everybody's life continues for 7.5 months. I come back, my life has happened, but now we're on 2 different timelines. People are with new people are engaged now, people are pregnant, other people have broken up, right? People have left the state. And I just left for 7.5 months and came back. And so it was like this whole new world. And then you throw on top of that, I'm uncomfortable in certain situations, in certain places. And I'm trying to like piece my life back together. And now on top of that, I made this decision to leave. And so it was just all of these things that kind of came to a head at once. And it's hard to explain, except for the fact that you're trying to get to know everybody else and the community that you are a part of, and the people that you know, all at the same time of you're trying to get to know yourself again. And if there's one thing that the military does a great job of, is it's the ability to turn off all of your emotions so that you can survive. And when you come back, when you haven't played that instrument in a while, those keys are a little bit rusty. Your skills are a little bit rusty. So your ability to connect with somebody is hard because you don't know how to open up again. And so then you're wondering, well, like, How comes there's so much resistance here? Like, you're my mom or you're my dad or you're my sister. Like, I don't get it. And so then you start to wonder, well, it must be me. It must be me. And so then you go into this spiral of just like, fuck, I signed up for this and now I'm in this position. Great. So what I do the first night I got back, watched a war film. Because it was all that I felt like I could like calm myself down with.
Wow. I'm going to put you in a position. And if you don't want to answer this, that's okay. But I am curious. I've never been able to ask this question, but with your situation, it's gotten me very genuinely curious about what it is that you would say. But here's the question. If you were able to, let's take that moment the day before you leave, before you're deployed for 7+ months. And you are who you are right now, like present day Sergio. But you were able to have a time portal of a telephone. You're like, hey man, this is me from the future. I know you're about ready to be deployed tomorrow, but I'm going to give you some advice on how to navigate things in the easiest way possible, because it's not going to be so pretty when you get back. And here's what I'm telling you to keep in mind. And here's what I'm telling you to do. What would you be telling yourself?
Feel all of it. Don't turn it off. Feel all of the emotions, the fear, the sadness, the happiness, the joy, the scare, the fear, or said fear twice, the anxiety, all of it. Like, don't try to suppress that stuff, but if anything, bring it to the light and use it as a mentor for yourself to understand yourself better. Because if you don't, you're going to have to put in the work on the back end, and all of the things that you learned along the way, you're going to have a difficult time remembering because of the trauma and the situation that you were put in. But if you can simply just document those moments, whether that's in a journal or a video or whatever, and you can get that out, the man and the lessons that you can create from that will forever serve as a blueprint and a framework for you to navigate anything in your life.
Wow. That is powerful, my friend. You didn't even need a moment to think about that. Is this something that you've had to work through, or was it just something that literally emerged for you as I asked the question?
Dude, honestly, it just kind of came out.
Man, how do you feel about that answer? I thought it was probably one of the most genuine, amazing answers ever. But for you, what was that like for you saying that?
Peaceful.
Yeah.
Because part of this, right? Like, Larry, part of this is I didn't do that. I didn't do that stuff. But I forced myself to go back and live a lot of that shit and like think through it and to write it down. And I may not have the most clear vision of what it was and how it impacted me and my fuck ups along the way and my successes along the way. But what I do know is that what I've been able to document and explore, man, it's put me in a position of peace. And I don't regret the decision I made to go over there. I don't regret my decision to join the military. I have no resentment towards my parents for making a decision and basically putting me in a spot where I had to make a choice. Dude, I feel like it's refined me to become a really great man, and it's taught me a lot about how to handle stress.
That's really powerful, man. The story I'm telling myself too is these experiences, while being extremely challenging, and some of the lessons that you have now learned and evolved from, it's probably made you a much more effective coach, maybe even a much more empathetic coach. You probably can meet people where they're at more effectively. As far as your business goes, it's probably giving you a lot of relentlessness in you, to keep going no matter what. In your marriage to Lizzie, to your son Luca. But I'm curious if you could identify one or two things that have come out of this positively, and I'm guessing things that have happened positively have happened more maybe as of recent or years just previous to us recording. What are some beautiful things that have come out of this that serve you now?
There's some real power in the darkness of us. And I think a lot of times we avoid it because, well, one, we either don't want to go in there because we're afraid of what might come out, or two, we just don't know how to go in there. And what I found is that my ability to take myself and lead myself through some of the darkest pits that I've ever experienced both whether it's a real life event, or it's an emotional event, or it's a spiritual event, or it's just a memory. Like my ability to go in there, process it, either bring the light with me or become the fucking light when I'm in there, allows me to then take the people that I work with to the depths of that, because I can take them there because I've been there myself. Now, it may not look the same, but I know how to lead us there. But I couldn't do that if I hadn't done it to myself. And so what's come from this and my ability to willingly go in there is like I have this level of knowing about myself that the more I do this, the more it becomes unshakable. And that allows me to lead for my family and lead for my son and lead myself and lead my parents and become a leader for my friends and my community and the people that I coach.
Wow. Yeah, I can definitely see how that would serve you. Most people, I agree, they're very scared to go to that place. You know, I would say I'd love to actually get your view on this. So the men that I work with, and I'm sure your clients as well, what I notice is there's a few different types of men out there, but let's identify just a couple of them. One being they're too afraid to do any personal development because they, quite frankly, they don't want to peel back that onion layer or peel back the curtain and see what's lurking in the shadows. It's just too scary. I don't want to deal with it. If I don't pay attention to it, you know, I won't have to deal with it. Right. And what I always say is, and I'm sure you do too, is those shadows will pop up whether you want them to or not, but you can either do it on your watch or you can do it on theirs. Which one do you want to do? And then the second one is the men who start to do the work and understand that it's not sunshine and rainbows all the time. Personal development is not. It's definitely this ebb and flow, peak valley, peak valley, peak valley. And as soon as they come face to face with some of those shadows or some of that darkness or some of those challenges, they're out. They're done. They don't want to deal with it. And I think it takes every time we hit, I think, a point where we don't know if we're going to move forward or it gets a little scary. The thing I always instruct our guys to do is that's when you need to double down and push harder, because something is incredible on the other side of that. But I think it takes several reps, right? Because you've done work and I've done work. I think it takes you several reps to be like, okay, it's getting really hard. Actually, this, like the coach that I was telling you about that I've been working with for I just got done with him. It was like right in the halfway, I was like, God bless, this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
This sucks. But also I also understood when I'm done with this, holy shit. Like there's gonna be some amazing things coming out. But you have to kind of talk yourself into that. But have you noticed the same?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of clients right now that are in their first probably dark night of the soul experience. And they're just sitting in it. And they're like, this is not what I signed up for, Sergio. And I'm like, this is exactly what the fuck you signed up for. Like, why didn't you tell me about this? I was like, because you wouldn't have signed up. I was like, and part of this is right, like you're exactly where you're supposed to be, right? And this is the work. It's not all happy clappy stuff. Like we have to go into some of this hard stuff. And for the men who don't want to kind of pull that back, right? It's really about getting them exposed to men who were in that similar mindset and how going into those shadows and exploring them, right, has allowed them to feel lighter and freer. So that's one of the things I'm trying to create a movement of men who can like reach back to the people that they know need it and talk to them and be a light for them. Be like, if I did it, you can do it. And because they would have known each other. And then you have the men who hit that resistance point, and they're at that point, it's really where we have to step in. And I already know that, our frequency might have to increase. The length of our calls might have to increase. My voice might have to come down a little bit. We might have to bring somebody else in to help navigate some of this stuff, all of which is fine because I know we're in the right path. But I think a lot of times when we get that initial resistance to it, we're like, ooh, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I know the door is here. I don't know if I want to open the door fully. Like, we think that the lesson is just finding the door. Oh, this is what's bothering me. Great, cool, fixed it. It's like, nah, we got to open that thing and we got to see what's in there. And in my experience, for me, it's taken me multiple times of circling the door, getting to the door, walking away, and then finally getting to the spot where I'm like, okay, I think I'm ready. So I'm just helping them build up the skill sets and the mindsets to be ready for when that moment arises for them.
That's good, man. That's really good. I think we need to go through those trials and those tribulations. It definitely makes us stronger. And if we can have a guide that helps us do that we don't have to navigate that alone, it does wonders. I think about we another movie we just watched was the original Karate Kid, right, with Daniel LaRusso. And there's this part, man, where Miyagi comes in and they don't really know each other yet, and Daniel's practicing his kicks as he's looking at this book, and he's like, "Oh, karate," and he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "Oh, learn from book, huh?" And but it becomes a lot more enjoyable, and it becomes harder, right? But we come better when we have a Miyagi in our life. So
Absolutely.
let me ask you this: as far as you mentioned, I want to pedal back again for a moment. You leave the military. You've been told that, like, hey, you can go have this cush job. You can be hired anywhere, as long as you pretty much work for the government. That really wasn't the direction you wanted to go in. Two-part question: how did you know that wasn't the direction you wanted to go in, and why was it important for you to start a business?
Yeah. I was tired of being put into a box. Right? I've been placed into a box for so long post-military. And this same thing happens in corporate America. Right? You have to be here at a certain time. You have to do work this way. This is how we've always done it. Right? You have to look this way. I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to create something on my own. I just wanted to be free for a moment. And so it was one of those things where I was like, okay, I just started to ask myself, like, well, what do I want? Like, if money wasn't an issue, what would I want to do? And so I sat with that question for quite a long time of just trying to figure out, well, what is it? Do I want to go back to school and get my MBA, or do I want to, become a CrossFit coach? That was on the docket. Or do I want to go test out corporate America at a tech job? Like, that sounds cool. But I really just started to ask myself those questions until I was able to finally land on an answer of, like, I want to be in control of my day, control of my life. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. So I forgot the second part of that question. I apologize.
No, it's okay. It was, why was it important for you to then start a business? But it sounds like you're kind of getting there because you wanted to basically design a business around your life, maybe, and not the other way around.
I wanted to design, like, what I wanted my perfect day to look like. I had this vision of, like, well, I want to make this amount of money. And I think at the time it was like $100,000. I was like, dude, if I could make that, I'll never have to work again. That was my thought. So definitely not true.
And then you have a kid and you're like, oh, it's not a lot of money, actually.
Yeah, you're like, actually, we're going to need a lot more than that. But I had this idea of what I wanted to do every day. I had this idea of my ability to go travel and not have to ask people to go on vacation. And so to me, it was like, I just want to be happy. I want to go to work and be happy. And so I chose to become a CrossFit coach. I didn't even start my own thing at the time. I just decided to go work for somebody else and really kind of step into that arena.
So working for somebody else, did that light the fires for you to become an entrepreneur even more? Or was this like, heck, I really kind of like this? Or was it just the fact that you were working under someone who's a business owner and maybe some of the things that you got to see that person do, maybe shed some light on what your perfect day could look like?
Yeah, I think it did a lot of those things. One, I was able to kind of see the way I would want to create it if it was my business. Like, oh, I wouldn't have done that. I like that. I would have done this differently. So I was able to have that experience. I think it also motivated me to see that, like, oh, you can actually go do something you want to do and make money from it. It doesn't have to be this, 9-to-5 job. It could be a culmination of things. And so that was really enlightening. And then I think the other part was, I was making $24,000 a year as a CrossFit coach, working 50 hours a week. But I was so happy. I was so happy. And, the military was making like 75,000, I think, or something like that. And so it was this massive pay cut, but every day I got to do what I wanted to do. And to me, it was like, I'm getting paid, I'm happy, and I have no real boss. So I was making $24,000 a year. I was $12,000 in credit card debt. And that was kind of this moment where I was like, okay, listen, this isn't going to work out. I need to go find something else. And that's what led me to the corporate America job. That's what allowed me to step into real estate. And, really, I went from making $65,000 as an account manager back down to making $0 in my first 7 months as a real estate agent because I didn't sell a single home.
Wow. So the story I'm telling myself though is, so it had nothing probably to do with lack of effort. You were probably working extremely hard. What was the biggest gap between month 1 and month 7 of not not bringing home any revenue?
Hired a coach. I hired
Okay.
a coach, and right when you first start something, your focus, my effort was there, but my focus was everywhere. It's like, oh, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make this marketing campaign. I'll make these phone calls. I'll do this activity and this activity, but it wasn't focused enough to drive any results. So once I hired a coach, I was able to start to get a little bit of a framework and a blueprint, and he was able to basically guide me to do the right things to start to generate some revenue. And then from there on, it was just, I mean, it took off like a rocket ship because the effort that I had was now focused effort, and I was cutting through stuff like a laser beam. And that was powerful.
What did the coach teach you that made things so much more efficient?
That I wasn't selling homes, I was selling myself. So I
Okay.
had to be able to be confident in who I was as an individual, have the right skill sets. He also told me how to create a relationship based business and not just have to cold call, which to me, I was like, oh, this is perfect. I want to tap into my network of people. And then it was really about being consistent with my efforts, even when I'm not seeing the results.
What type of shift did you have to make when it came to, I'm not really selling a home, I'm selling who I am? What did you have to change?
I wanted to be proud of who I was selling. And that really kind of took this personal growth and development thing into hyperdrive. If I'm selling myself, then when I meet you, I want you to get the best version of me. And the only way that I can truly sell myself with confidence is knowing that I've invested the time and effort in myself to become the best version of myself. And in that, I'm still becoming that version of me. And so to me, it was like, okay, as long as I have the skills that I need to sell a home and I have the competence and confidence in myself, and I'm a good man with making decisions that are aligned with my values, I don't know that I can go wrong.
I just want to pause for a second because there was a certain type of complete and total confidence shift as you started to talk about that. You've talked about everything very confidently, but as you talked about growing your confidence through this process of, not only do I have the skill, I'm investing in myself, I'm learning, I'm growing. It was like every single thing that you talked about, the voice tone that you had was more and more and more confident, more and more secure, more and more true to who you were, which for me hearing you talk like that, well, I would have no doubt in my mind then other than to believe in you as well, right? I'm curious, is you're married now for 2 years?
Yeah.
How is this type of individual being who you are shown up in your marriage, and how has that made that relationship fruitful with you and your wife?
I mean, we had a rough go, man. Called off our wedding. Uh, we were in couples therapy for 2.5 years. Like we hated each other. And yet,
No way.
oh yeah. And like
I didn't know this part.
oh yeah. So we called off our wedding because we were fighting a ton. Like we were throwing shit at each other. I was sleeping in hotel rooms. It was bad, man. And we got to a spot where there's this moment of peace, and we're like, do we want to be in the relationship? And the moment that we decided that we were the right people for each other, that's when it was like, all right, cool. Well, I'm not the man right now for the relationship, so I'm going to build the fucking man. And I'm going to build the man the exact way I built my fucking real estate business. I'm going to invest in me. I'm going to develop the skill sets. I'm going to become the best version of me. And knowing that she was doing the same thing and now we're doing it together, like that was just, I was leading, then she was leading, then we were both leading. And I just took everything that I had learned in building myself after the military, building myself to create a real estate business. And now I was just building myself to be the man in the relationship and be the man that I wanted to be for my wife.
So I'm curious. I think a lot of times couples in strife, right? I don't know if there's like this looming thing going on in the relationship where both parties are like, maybe, right? It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, I want to be with you. No, I really don't. I can see myself with you. I can see myself without you. It's constantly like this teeter totter. But for you, a defining moment was like, I want to be with you, period. And I'm going to do it. Was there a moment in time that made that decision just unbelievably clear for you?
Yeah.
And I would also imagine that once that decision's made, it was probably a launching pad, but I want you to share with us, how did you even get to that decision?
I'm sitting in my car, and my wife and I just got into a fight. I'm on my phone with my best friend. And I was like, dude, I think I'm going to go home and break up with her. I think this is the time. And he goes, dude, you're going home to see her family tomorrow. You can't just break up with her tonight. He's like, do this. Go on the trip. If you still want to break up with her when you get home, then you can do it. I was like, all right, whatever. So I go on this trip. And one of the reasons that we would always fight is like every time that I brought something up about something that maybe she did, she would just shut me down and she would make it about herself. And I'm not saying that I didn't do things. There's plenty of ways that I did things as well. But for me, that was one of the main things. That's what was like, if you can't respect me like on any level, then I don't want to do this shit. So we go back to Minnesota and it's for her grandfather's funeral. And we're sitting at the, it's not the reception, whatever the dinner is after the fact. And me and my wife are on one end of the table and her parents are on the other end of the table. And then there's all these family members and people that I don't know. And somehow we get on the conversation about college. And her mom goes, oh, yeah, you know, Lizzie's sister is the smart one and Lizzie's the pretty one. And I, at the table in front of all these people I don't know, and there's, it's dead quiet. I go, are you fucking kidding me with that? I was like, you can't say that to your daughter. I was like, you don't get to do that type of stuff. I was like, do you have any idea how hurtful that is? So then she starts crying. She's like, that's not how I meant it, right? And she makes this whole scene and makes it about her and she leaves. And Lizzie's obviously shaken up. I'm just livid. People are looking at me and Lizzie's like, should we go outside? I was like, yeah, I think we probably should. So we walk outside. Lizzie's not mad at me. She's like, my mom just makes everything about her. And Lizzie's upset about it. And I go, I just want you to know, I voiced my concern and she made it about her. And that's exactly what you do to me. And she goes, I'm sorry. And we talked through it. We had this beautiful conversation. And from that point forward, we were in fucking lockstep.
Wow, man. That is quite a moment.
Yeah.
So have you and your mother-in-law recovered?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I just kind of say it how it is. I respect her for who she is and we get along. And I think it's probably just a slip of the tongue. I think that the tension and the frustrations had just built up from everything Lizzie and I had gone over and I hadn't processed it. So she kind of got the brunt of it. But to me, there's no hard feelings there and it is what it is.
So one of the things that we always talk about in the Dad Edge community is, you know, especially for business owners, is this trifecta, which is exactly what you do, right? This trifecta of going out and continuing to grow and scale your business, do the work that makes you come alive, build an empire if you want to, right? But don't do it at the expense of the relationships that are most meaningful under your own roof. So the second part of the trifecta is creating an extraordinary marriage. For me, Jessica, for you, Lizzie, for our listeners, obviously your wives. And then the third is creating an incredible bond with your sons, daughters, your kids, whatever, right? But for you, you know, what are the guardrails that you and Lizzie live by as far as how you operate within your relationship to make sure that your relationship is always on point? What are the things you do?
Yeah. We have a pretty big standing rule that we try to do date nights once a week. And I say that like we don't try, like we do it. It may just be the two of us. It may be a family event, but we make sure that we get time together. We also make sure that, you know, if we're in the middle of a fight, because conflict is going to happen, we think about the framework about what Luca is going to see. And we kind of operate within that the conflict isn't bad. It only becomes bad when we start to elevate voices and then we start to disrespect one another in front of our kid. So date nights are important. That's important to us. Maintaining a healthy sex life is really important to us, right? Because we know that leads to intimacy and intimacy leads to connection and sex is a really big part of it. And then for us is like really just making the space for one another to be listened to, heard, and then we support one another. We don't enable one another, but we support one another in what we're trying to accomplish.
That's awesome, man. So date nights are important.
Yeah.
and then conflict resolution, right?
Yep.
Jess and I have these guardrails for when we argue, and sometimes I think we do our kids a service, and sometimes I think a disservice, and I'll explain. But we have the exact same viewpoint you do. So Jessica and I view ourselves, our relationship, as a walking, talking 3D movie that our kids have the front row seat to. So they're going to learn a functional relationship from us. They're also going to learn some pitfalls and that kind of thing. But one thing that they don't learn very well is conflict resolution. And quite frankly, it's because Jess and I hardly ever fight. But if we do disagree, we have those guardrails in place. And the guardrails are no name calling, no disrespect ever. I've never once called my wife a bitch. She's never called me an asshole, like in 26 years that I've known her. Like, never call each other a name. Voices are just as calm as I'm talking to you right now. And so is hers. We don't yell, right? We don't disrespect each other ever, even, and especially in front of the kids. We don't take sides in front of the kids. Kind of a quick, funny story. My 17-year-old, my wife and I were having a disagreement not too long ago. And we were just disagreeing. You could tell we were disagreeing. We weren't yelling. We were disagreeing. And he walked by the table and he's like, "Are you guys fighting?" And I'm like, "We're disagreeing." And he goes, "Are you guys going to get a divorce?" And I'm like, "What?" I was like, so in his mind, it was really this moment of like, arguing means we break up.
Yeah.
And I was like, I looked at Jess and I was like, "Would you have any qualms about him sitting down and just watching us walk through this?" And she's like, "No." And I was like, "Ethan, have a seat." He's like, "Okay." And so we sat down. I think it took us 10, 15 minutes. We resolved things. And I looked at him and I go, "What'd you see?" And I didn't tell him anything I just told you. He's like, "That was cool." He goes, "You guys didn't yell at each other." I was like, "Nope." He goes, "There's no name calling." I was like, "Nope." I was like, "What else?" He goes, and I was really impressed that he caught this one. He goes, "No one interrupted each other.
Mm.
Like, you heard every single word mom said before you started talking and vice versa."
Yeah.
Yep. I was like, "What'd you get about the end?" He goes, "The end was each one of you," and I love that he caught this, "each one of you had to give a little, had to sacrifice a little,
Yep.
to come to a compromise." And I'm like, "Yep." And he's like, "That was cool." I was like, "That's how adults do it. So next time you want to punch your brother in the head," I was like, "maybe talk some things out." Right.
Yeah.
So,
It's interesting
but
that
that's,
you say that. Like Lizzie and I aren't perfect. Like we raise our voices at one another. She's called me an asshole. I've called her a bitch, and I share that with you because we are in process of continuing to grow and really setting those guidelines. And Luca's 16 months. It doesn't mean he's not picking up on things. And so to hear you say that, right? Immediately there was like guilt for me. And then I immediately then went to, well, like, cool, but this is an example of how you can start to adjust and adapt, which I think is really great that one, you shared that. And then two, that your son picked up on that because that's what I want mine to see.
yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell you, man, I mean, the things that you go through that you and Lizzie are hung up on, Jess and I haven't done that, but we've done different things. So like stonewalling,
Yeah.
that was something we used to do to each other. Right. Well, if you're going to be like this, then I'm just going to withhold affection. We've
Yeah.
done that one to each other. Right. Or if I might not disrespect you or call you a name, but if you ask me a question, I'll give you a 1-word answer in a really demeaning tone.
Yeah.
Right. There's that one. The other thing too is this was always her favorite. Oh my God, it would piss her off. Like, we'd get in an argument, I'd walk away.
Yeah.
Be like, I'm done. I'm not talking about this. And I'd walk away. She'd be like, "Oh my God, like, how are we going to resolve anything? You keep walking away." So I share that with you because, like, man, it wasn't always so. We haven't
Yeah.
done some things, but we did others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. Lizzie likes to walk away too, and we've had to have conversations like, "Please don't." I was like, it just sparks something
Yeah.
in me that I can't even control. So, and she's like,
Yeah.
"I can respect that."
Yeah. Well, it is. It's like, you're not, in somebody's face calling them a demeaning name, but it's insanely disrespectful to be like, "You're just not worth my time anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not doing this right. I don't have the energy for you." Right. So it's different. So as far as what you do, I'm so curious. You went from a $24,000 a year job as a CrossFit instructor or coach, and now, you're running a business over $1 million. You help other entrepreneurs do that as well. But share with the audience, what does the business life look like in Sergio's world? You have coaching, you have real estate. Is there anything else in there?
No, I mean, those are the two main ones. I think there's some overlap between the two, right? Real
Sure.
estate's coaching and coaching real estate agents from time to time. I think those are the two main ones. And even with that, right? Like at some point, there's going to come a time where I'm going to have to go all in on coaching. And I'm aware of that. And there will be a select few clients that I work with in real estate. Coaching is where I'm supposed to be. Coaching is like in my soul, the purpose that I know where I'm supposed to do. And so right now it's just building that and iterating on that and getting into a spot where I'm like, okay, it's ready. I can go all in on that. And that will be, who knows when it will happen. I have a feeling it'll probably be in the next six months.
For sure, man.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt you'll get there, especially with your tenacity. I am curious though. You mentioned in a lot of your interviews and in your mission is, why the life you want, the marriage you want, the family you want is fueled by the business that you build. I would love for you to just share some insight on that.
Yeah. My mentor gave that to me and I've loved it ever since. You have to think about this, like the relationship that you have with your business, the way you take care of it, the way you treat it, right? All of the skills that you have in there are carried over into every other part of your life. And money doesn't buy you happiness, except it kind of does. It solves like 99% of your problems. Now, I'm not saying it's going to give you fulfillment, but it can solve a lot of your problems. And so the business that you create allows you to create the lifestyle that you want for your family. It allows you to show your kids what leadership looks like, what perseverance looks like, what tenacity looks like. It allows you to create security for your wife or your spouse. It requires for you to put a commitment into your body that will then allow you to take the energy and the confidence and the commitments that you put or the consistency that you put into your body and carry that back into what you need to accomplish in your business. And then there's also this big part about your relationships, just not with your wife and your kid, but with yourself. Like on a deep level, you have to know who you are. Right? I told you my soul's purpose is to run this coaching company. And so in order for me to know that, right, I have to know who I am and what I stand for. But having a business run allows you to support and do everything that you want in all other domains of your life. It makes life a lot easier, especially when it's your soul's purpose and it's your calling. And you can create some real, I don't know, some just like some real wealth out of it. And
Yeah.
it's not just about money, but like I said earlier, it solves a lot of problems and opens up a lot of
Yeah,
opportunities as well.
it does. I will tell you this, growing up the way I did, and I think that everybody has a money story. Every single person walking the planet, right? Money is the root of all evil. Some people will say that, right? Some people, disagree with that. And they're like, actually, the more money you have, and if you're a good person, the more good you can do. So it's not necessarily the root of all evil. It's actually the person who has the money. What are they going to do with it? I'll share this with you as well. Money is, I didn't come from much. So, running the business that I do, it's, we do just fine, right? And I will share with you that, money does give you options. I never really thought of it like this, but one of my mentors said this. He's like, you don't think money can't buy you happiness? And I'm like, no, I don't think it can. And he's like, okay, well, your kid just got sick and your insurance won't cover the treatments. God only knows what we won't go into what he has, but your kid just got sick and needs these treatments in order to survive. But money's the root of all evil and money can't buy you happiness. And so what are you going to do? He's like, would you be happier knowing that you had the wealth to get the treatments he needed to survive? And I'm like, oh yeah. It was just a different perspective. And I'm like, man, that's really powerful. So, and I do find the more money I make, the more I can pay my employees, the more I give to my church, the more I give to our high school football team. I just made 2 donations to our football team,
Yeah.
things like this. The other thing I want to share with you too, and then I want you to share where men can find you and then maybe the best way you can help them. So while you think of that, I'll share this story with you. A few years ago, it's been almost 3 years, I left a job making over $250,000 a year. I don't say that to brag. I do not. I worked my way up 18 years in the medical device industry. I was actually a director of sales for an entire sales force, ran the country, and I was doing Dad Edge on the side. But I had scaled Dad Edge because, quite frankly, I had to. You know, we have 60 people that work for me in some capacity that's on our payroll. And I had to build it that way because I didn't have the time. Like I was like, I can do these things. I can do one-on-one coaching. I can lead some calls and I can do the podcast, but I can't really do, like, I can't run 50 call teams in our mastermind group, right? But I can hire that out, which I did. But I was able to enjoy making the salary I did, you know, at the company I did. I also was creating a business within Dad Edge, never paid myself from it, not once. And what I can tell you is the last 3 years that I was in that job were the 3 most miserable years I ever had. And I'll tell you why. It was because I had made the most in that 3 years. If you look at Dad Edge and if you look at what I was doing in that business, and I was actually, the last year I was there, I made the most I ever have in my life. And that because we were blowing out our quota. But I was miserable. I felt this tremendous pressure cooker that never went away. It was from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed. You would find me on 2 computers all day long for 8 to 10 hours a day, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I didn't even realize how strung out and how exhausted I was and how actually quite unhappy I was until I decided, I was like, okay, I'm done here. I'm just going to go full on with Dad Edge. And that was almost 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And what I'll tell you is I now make, on paper, right? I make less money, but I have never, I make more than what I did in device sales, you know, if I didn't combine the two. But I am so much happier, so much more fulfilled. I now have room for margin in my days. You know, I can show up. I was on a group coaching call with me and 3 of my other coaches with one of our groups, and it was being facilitated by one of our other coaches, but I was there listening in, and I was at my son's football practice at the same time. I was like, and he didn't even know I was showing up. I did it by surprise. I just showed up and I sat in the stands. And when you're in high school, you go sit like kind of far away, right? But it's so much more happiness, right, with that. But anyway, back to you and where men can find you and how you effectively help them would be great.
Dude, first, I do want to acknowledge that, like, you are speaking to me. Like, my margin is pretty thin right now. It's intentional with what I'm doing, right? Running 2 businesses is hard, man. You know this.
Yeah.
And it ain't even about the money. It's just about creating some cushion for me to actually jump into this full time. And that day is coming. But in the short term, I'm like, okay, I am making the decision to do this. And so I'm going to, I don't want to say live with the consequences, but I'm going to accept that this is just building capacity for me to do more. Guys can find me. I mean, Instagram is probably the best thing. Sergio.Nazzaro. That's where I do most of my content. That's where I do most of my like lives and all that type of stuff. You know, if you're interested in learning more, right, there's a bunch of information in my bio. You can go check that out. But really what this is about, right, and the reason I named it Become the Standard is because I believe in this life that you can have it all. You can have the body you want at whatever age you are. You can have a connection with yourself and with your spouse and with your kids that's on fire. Like, just because you're in your 20th year of marriage doesn't mean this flame has to go out. Just because you didn't have a good upbringing as a dad or as a kid
100%.
doesn't mean you can't be a great father. And you can create a business just like we just talked about, a business that makes you happy, that's fulfilling, but also pays you well and opens up opportunities. And the reason I named it Become the Standard is because you get to set the standard of what you want your life to look like. That when your kids look at you, they look at you and they're like, that is what I expect my life to be like. And I've seen how it was built. That you become the standard for marriages, and not only in your own home, but you also in your community, that the people who see you, they're like, how do you guys have this? And the fact that you can build a business based on what you want to do and have the income that you want, and all while being in the best shape of your life, like, you can truly have it all, and you can set the standard and become the standard for everybody that you come in contact with and give them permission to do the same.
I love that, man. Yeah, you can have it all. Even a 48-year-old like me. You can have it all.
Yeah, you can.
Um, very good, my man. Well, hey guys, you won't have to look far. You can head on over to thedadedge.com/440 for this show if you want to connect with Sergio. We are going to have his website, his Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and a link to subscribe to his podcast. If something he said spoke to you today and you want to just even simply reach out, send him a DM, thank him for his amazing authenticity today. He shared some stories that were obviously near and dear, very personal stories, especially ones while he was serving our country and then making the transition out and how that's impacted him today. But Sergio, from the bottom of my heart, man, thank you for coming on today. This was incredibly inspirational, and just appreciate your time, man.
Thanks for having me on. This was awesome.
You bet, man. Gentlemen, like I said, thedadedge.com/440 for this episode. Thank you for all the support. Thank you for sharing the show. Thank you for all the 5-star reviews. Continue to go out and live legendary, gentlemen. Take care.